Yeah.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome someone who many of you may know, but if you don't know him, you're in for a real treat today. Pastor Lucas Miles is my guest today. He's the author of the book, one of my, I love the title. It's very provocative, and you guys are going to laugh when you hear it. Woke Jesus, the False Messiah Destroying Christianity. Now, I could continue raving about Pastor Lucas until the cows come home, really. But I thought the best idea would be Pastor Lucas share who he is, what he does, and why he does it for you all in his own words. So, Pastor Lucas, can you please take it away?
Hey, thanks for having me, first of all. And it's good to be with you. And we've been able to connect a couple times, and always a pleasure. So I'm excited to kind of dive into a broader conversation here. So, yeah, I pastor a church. This is actually my 20th year of being at the exact same church, which is a rarity in today's world. And, praise God, we've avoided to have any sort of major scandal or issues or anything. I mean, you look at the world today of church, and it's a rocky place sometimes. So we really want to create a place of stability. And we're not perfect people by any means, but God's done just some amazing things here, and we're really grateful to be able to pastor the group of people that we pastor. So we're in South Bend, Indiana. It's maybe for your audience close to the University of Notre Dame, and about 90 miles east of Chicago. And this is an area that it's a very conservative state, but it is a very liberal city that I'm in. And so we've had to kind of stand against a really progressive uprising, and really try to be a voice for historic biblical Christianity and orthodoxy, in our area. I started preaching at a young age. I was about 17. I actually planted this church when I was 24. My wife and I did, and just very grateful for those experiences that we've had. I've dabbled a little bit in film and Hollywood. I've produced a couple movies. And faith-based, family-friendly sort of stuff. Have a passion for, coaching, what I would call high performers, helping them really be able to multitask and to lean into God's grace to be able to do more in their life. You and I have talked about this. My wife and I don't have children, so our projects and our businesses and our ministry really more than anything become kind of the focal point of our mission in life. And so, we feel like you get one time to live out, God's calling for yourself on this earth, and we're trying to give it our all. We really are. And so since that time, I published a couple books, Good God, The Christian Left, Woke Jesus. Have a couple compilation projects that I've been part of, including Dr. George Barna's Helping Millennials Thrive. Let's see here. I speak around the country. I did about 500 media appearances last year on everything from Fox to Newsmax to Charlie Kirk's show and others all in between. But just very grateful to be doing what we're doing. It's a wild time to be alive, and right now I'm just excited to be here with you.
I'm excited to have you here. I really do enjoy listening to you speak, and it's like a real treat for me because I get to actually ask you questions and then listen to you respond to those questions. You mentioned something that's very interesting, like the fact that a lot of churches in today's society, they're leaning really liberal, and it's rather concerning to actually see.
Yeah.
How come your church hasn't gone the liberal route?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the grace of God. We see so much, so many people. I was even just talking to somebody earlier today, people that I've discipled 5-10 years ago that, over during COVID and stuff, we lost touch with. And then I see them today, and it's like they're different people. It's like there's literally like this veil over their eyes. And deconstructionism is so prevalent. An uprising in paganism is so prevalent. And there's a lot of things that are happening that are kind of leading, people in this direction. A lot of money is being poured at the church for the specific agenda of really getting it to agree with these progressive dogmas. In the United States, there's very little difference between what we would call the Christian left and the Biden administration. They have the same view of marriage, sexuality, gender, national sovereignty, same view of Israel, all of these things. I've made it really a passion of mine to, I guess, do two things. And they're kind of simple. The first one is I want to stay close to Jesus. And that is, I want to stay in his word. I want to fellowship with him. I want to know him. I never want to distance myself from him. The second thing is, I think, not as paramount as the first, but also very important. And that is, I've just sort of made a commitment that I want to study church history, and I want to know church history well. And I don't have a doctorate of divinity, but I would probably put my reading schedule up against about anybody else's out there in terms of the material that I've been able to go through, the source documents I've been able to go through, and to really study that out. And what you learn when you see that is that the heresies and these apostate beliefs that the early church faced, they're cyclical, and so they've come back around, and now we're seeing that they're surfacing again. And the church has defeated these things before, and it gives you a roadmap and a guide to avoid falling into some of those pitfalls the best you can, and to know how to stand against them. And so those two things together, I think, have safeguarded us a little bit. They've inoculated us against sort of this woke mind virus that's happening. But I don't take that for granted. I'm thankful every single day that God loves us, and that he's faithful, and that his word is true.
I remember listening to a very godly man here in Australia, and he had a saying. He goes, "You don't go left, you don't go right, you go deeper into Jesus." And that kind of, because we live in such an overly politicized world, you look at the example of Jesus, it's almost as if like he hated politics. Like he called out the Pharisees and the Sadducees for being hypocrites majorly. Yeah. And I think a lot of Christians today, it always amazes me how they read the word of God and then they change it to suit their own agenda of certain things.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That happens on the left and the right? So we see that in both worlds. And look, I'm an outspoken conservative. I believe that, the election that we have coming up in the United States is one of the most important of any time, at least in recent history, and possibly one of the most important in the history of the nation. But it's so polarized, and we see, I don't agree with everything that I see happening on the right in terms of how things are handled, and maybe even at times how the word is handled. There's been a lot of agreements and a lot of distortion that's taken place there too, and so it's difficult. So although I hold to a conservative worldview, oftentimes you could feel like if you're really honest, you're just going to make everybody mad, and but I think you're right. I think at times that's what Jesus did, and we can agree with something and agree with a policy while still providing biblical counsel and biblical critique against something, and that's a lost art. But I think that we need more of that in our society today. The church's job is to be that conscience of the state.
Wouldn't that be considered, I guess, some people may think of that as sort of like being a fence sitter in a way, sort of like you're not trying to anger a lot of people, but then even if you do have a stance in a way, you're going to anger one other side, if you know what I mean. Like it's like, how do we try and avoid that trap or that pitfall?
Yeah, so here in the U.S., and that's the politics I'm obviously most familiar with, you have a super progressive administration that is pushing a lot of ungodly ideas, and they seem to be doing things with an intentional agenda to really thwart the strength, the efforts, the sovereignty of our nation. Okay, the porous southern border, would be probably the best example. The way we exited Afghanistan, there's a lot of things. I mean, we went from having no new wars under Trump to now it feels like World War III everywhere, under Biden. And so that's something that we have to acknowledge. The left stance on abortion, the left stance on marriage, the left stance on sexuality. These are obvious wrongs. These are against God's system. They're against his word. Within conservative views, I think you have a lot of really strong policies. I think you have a lot of really strong personalities, right? And you have a lot of great figures that are there. But at times the tactics I don't always agree with. And what I mean by that is, I saw one conservative here recently, who was a congresswoman who, is talking about that, she only worships one person and his name is Jesus. But in this whole rant that she gives about that, she probably dropped the F-bomb like 3 different times, and so I agree with her on, she's so mad and so frustrated against this kind of woke virus that's rising up. She's right about a lot of things that she's saying, but the discipleship isn't there. And so the delivery is poor. And it's not even necessary. I mean, obviously, everybody has a personal responsibility. I'm a huge believer in personal responsibility. That's one of the things that actually separates conservatives from progressives in the U.S. But it's really tough to be discipled as a prominent figure. And I don't think that's just true in the States. I would guess that's true in Australia as well, because if you walk into a church and you're Justin Bieber or Kanye West or a famous politician, all of a sudden everybody's looking over their shoulder and they go, hey, do you see that's so-and-so over there? That's so-and-so over there. And so you can't just plug in the same way to get discipled. And then you have pastors that, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got this politician, or I got Justin Bieber, or I got Kanye West attending my church, that are they really going to be honest with you when you're the same way that they would somebody else who's committing themselves to discipleship? And so now look, I have a lot of relationships with, I can go to DC and sit with congressmen and senators that I know. I can go to LA and sit with, Hollywood celebrities that I've poured into and mentored. And I'm willing to be the same person in all of those environments and say the same thing. But what has to be there is those people have to decide whether or not they want to be pastored. I have an authority in somebody's life as a pastor only to the degree that they allow me to speak into them. Now, I could go around and just fire, all these tough truths at everybody on a one-on-one basis. But if they don't want to receive that, or they're not looking for that, it's just going to push them away. So I could talk, in an interview or a podcast like this, I can talk very broadly about what's true and what's false and what the direction the nation should go. But the moment it becomes a one-on-one relationship, that has to be invited in their life, for them to welcome that. And I think a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot. I think there's some conservatives that are right on their politics in many ways, but misguided still in their discipleship journey in Christ. I'm glad that they're believers. I'm glad that they seem to have some pursuit of the Lord, but they would benefit from really getting under a solid pastor that could be strong with them, understand what they're going through, and help them navigate through these things specifically. And so it's not judgment. I think it's just it's an area that we could improve on.
I've also heard a lot of Christians say that they don't care too much about politics. And so because it is quite polarizing, can kind of really annoy the living daylights out of people. It annoys me just by looking at my own political system here in Australia. And then I look at the US's, and you guys are like the big brother. So what you guys do, we end up following suit about 2 weeks later sometimes. And it's really frustrating as well. I always say that our prime minister is like our Joe Biden, and our foreign affairs minister is like your Kamala Harris, because they're both aligned so much on the stupidity on what they believe in. But why should Christians care in today's society, especially? Why should they care about politics, and what kind of politics should they care about? And then also a caveat question to all that is, why shouldn't Christians swear?
Oh, great question on both of those. So first off, why care about politics? So it's interesting. Let's define this first of all. So politics, really what this is it's a necessary thing. Anytime you have 2-3 people together, there's politics. There is some system of how they're going to decide to work together. If it's an LLC or a business or, some sort of corporation, they have bylaws, they have rules, they have things that govern themselves. If you're starting a business deal, if you're going into a partnership, if you don't have rules on how to govern yourselves, the moment you hit a problem, it's just chaos, right? It's really hard to navigate that. Now, when 2 people are good natured, like in a marriage, my wife and I don't have necessarily like a list of rules up on the wall or like some sort of, a legal agreement that we've signed outside of a marriage license that's just saying that we're making that commitment of how we're going to operate, who's going to do what, all these sorts of things. But because we are people who both love the Lord and love each other, we're able to navigate through those things. But when you're in a society, especially a pluralist society where you have people from a lot of different backgrounds, now all of a sudden, not everybody has the same worldview. And so you have to have ways to navigate that. That becomes the politic. And so rules, laws, a constitution, all of these things frame how the society operates. And so, if to say, well, I don't believe in politics. Well, sure you do. Because if you don't, somebody can take your car, somebody can rob your business, and there's no laws or rules to govern that. Why? Because there's no structure that's in place. So we all have to care about politics. It's actually an ignorant statement to think that, well, I just don't want anything to do with politics, because we have to care about it. Now, you might not like all the drama that comes with today's politics, but it doesn't have to be like that. Ideally, if the church can do its job of actually influencing a nation. Now, I don't believe, and I actually speak out, I write against in my book, Woke Jesus, which you've probably seen, this idea of Christian nationalism. I'm not in support of it. I don't believe that the church should be running the state. I think those entities should be separate, but I do believe the church should be the conscience of the state. I think I've said that already on the show. And what I mean by that in particular is, Jesus said in the Great Commission that we are to go out and make disciples of all nations, right? It's not just an individual discipleship. We're actually to impact nations, to impact worldviews, to impact, people groups in such a way that the temperature, if you will, the spiritual temperature of those regions begins to be transformed. And so, when as the church in a nation, we should look for ways to impact that nation with the gospel. Rome shifted from paganism to Christianity because of the impact that the gospel made in Rome, because of how Christians behaved, because of the witness that they had. And we should be seeing the same thing take place in Australia and America today. And look, I think that we are starting to experience what I would call sort of a third great awakening in America. There is, we have seen revivals happening, mass baptisms taking place, a lot of young people coming to the Lord. Actually, our young men in this nation are really starting to, I think, embrace a lot more conservative ideas and values. I think the younger women are still more impacted by progressive ideology and some of the third wave feminism and these different things that we've seen. But we should care about politics, and we should be pushing into this. For if you have the right to share the gospel in the nation that you live in today, because of a politic that lends itself to religious freedom. If that ceases, which there's a lot of people that would love to see that cease, then we will lose that right. I mean, even just today in the Supreme Court in the U.S., there was a ruling about basically that the Biden administration didn't do anything wrong by working directly with social media outlets in order to, censor certain groups and promote certain ideas. Essentially, government interference in the press, and I think the Supreme Court voted the wrong way. That's a political thing. And if we have 3-4 more decisions like that by the Supreme Court, there are rights that are lost at a major level, and it allows for this sort of authoritative, tyrannical, sort of government to really prevail. And so we have to be on guard against that because it's not only our individual freedoms that are at stake, but our ability to be able to share the gospel free from persecution, I think, is another major factor there. And so I'll pause there, but that's at least a little bit.
I do want to point out the fact that I think it is extremely attractive when a woman is leaning more conservative and she actually makes sense. It's very unattractive when you see these women because they look crazy. It looks like they're on something that's not healthy.
Yes. Well, some of them are on something, and it's called they're demonized, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is just there is an ideology. And look, this isn't just philosophy. It's not just a political science view. There's a spirituality here. There is a deception that's taking place. And look, I'm not here, trying to predict when Jesus is coming back, but we're certainly closer today than we were yesterday. And I think that you see a great deception that's taking place right now. And I don't think that's coincidental. I think that that's something that's been predicted. I think that's something that's been prophesied about. We see revealed in the scriptures. We're starting to experience that. This isn't just a small thing. This is people that were once super solid in the faith are completely walking away and becoming apostate in their views. And that is reason for concern. And you're right. My wife actually has a shirt that says "Happy girls are the prettiest." And I think that's such, it sums up a lot of our culture today. And obviously it's not just about, how you look, your aesthetic or something like that. But, somebody who's full of joy, somebody who's happy, somebody who's alive is so much more attractive and drawing in than somebody who just sees themselves as a victim, who's oppressed, who's, kind of this, demanding justice and all these sort of things that you see within this kind of Marxist, subculture that's developed and quickly becoming the primary culture. But, you're absolutely right in that.
You're also very accurate in saying that a lot of them are demon possessed because they're always so angry and they get so aggressive. And if you touch on a point that they don't like, my goodness, do they just go in for the attack? And I'm like, whoa, chill out there. I mean, I follow, there's a girl that I like on social media. She's done great stuff, and you may know her because she's part of Charlie Kirk's band, Morgan McMichael. And she put up something yesterday, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And I just had to make a comment for myself. But apparently experts are saying that milk is considered to be racist because it's linked to colonialism or something along those lines. And I just was like, if an expert is saying that milk is racist, they're not an expert, they're an idiot.
Yes, 100%. Look, I mean, math is racist. Being on time is racist. Cutting your grass is racist. Yeah. What was that?
Saying good morning is racist.
Yes, 100%. So this is all just an attempt to really deconstruct society, to have this sort of Marxist phoenix, rise from the ashes and have a reboot. It's socialism, it's communism. It doesn't work. It's been proven it doesn't work. I mean, socialism has been responsible for over 100 million deaths in the last 100 years, and it's going to continue doing that every time it's given life. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people that are ignorant. They don't know history very well. They haven't studied these things out. They haven't read Marcuse and Mao and Freire and others to really see the outcome of this. They've just kind of bought into the lies that they're hearing, and the what's being pumped into them through social media and everything else. And it's and in the school systems, it absolutely. I mean, our school systems have been infiltrated. Our churches have been infiltrated. Our medical system has been infiltrated. That 5 years ago sounded like conspiracy theory. Today, it's really obvious. I mean, there's outspoken agendas about these things. The videos have been seen. The people are out there. They've been exposed. And so anybody that's not on the right side of this thing right now is either they're just putting their head in the sand, or they're living in deception.
I was listening to Jordan Peterson yesterday talk with Catherine Berbelsing, who runs Michaela School in the UK. And obviously, Catherine leans quite conservative. She's got relatively conservative values, although she's not a Christian. She's stated that. But the way she disciplines, the way she organizes things, I believe in personal responsibility, taking ownership of things, which I like. And then she was saying that the way that we need to structure discipline is she's heard a lot of people say, we need to instead of saying we need to tell people what to think, we need to tell them how to think, or something along those lines, or teach them how to think. But she goes, we need to tell people what to think, because if we don't tell them what to think, then they don't know how to think. But it's what we're telling them, it's what we're teaching them, the kind of knowledge. And I've always been like, we need to tell them how to think, because critical thinking is, or in my brain at least, it was going along those lines. Like, I need to be able to ask the right kinds of questions in terms of philosophy and debating. If I don't know how to do any of that, I was like, well, what's the point in knowing any of it? But you've got to have the basics.
Look, I'm a big believer in classical education whenever you can. I know that many times those are very expensive, for children, but I think a Christian classical education specifically is probably the best thing that you can get. Obviously, a strong, homeschool family can offer, some similar things as well, and I'm supportive of homeschoolers. But kids need to be reading Augustine. They need to be reading Cicero. They need to be reading, Aristotle and Plato and different thinkers to really build that foundation of how to process through ideas, how to think through things, logical conclusions, all of that stuff that is part of that. And of course, we need the, reading, writing, arithmetic part of school and education. But I think that those building blocks that really make up that classical education and some of those thinkers are so powerful. And I think it's a missing component for the world today. I was at a situation here recently with a group of young people, and I was just amazed at it was one of the first times that on on a really personal level, I was able to witness some of these generation gaps and generational differences. We had people from a couple different generations, and just to see how they thought through problems, how they were dealing with the world. And I don't want to say too much because these are all people I love, and we had a great time together. But it was just like I went, oh, that's kind of that Gen Z thing, that's that millennial thing, because we had people from about 4 different generations present, and you could see those distinctions so clearly. And I think that some of the younger generations, they're great people. There's some Gen Zs that we know and that we're close with, and even family members of ours. They're so creative, they're so brilliant in so many areas, but they've missed out, I think, on a lot of things that the world was offering 20, 30 years ago that were more widely accepted. And it's rethinking all of that stuff. Even like the Common Core math that we see here in the United States, like it was a UN basically activist that introduced this. And the purpose of this, really, in my opinion, was to separate parents from children. It was to get to the point to where, before I would have a math problem, my dad was a financial planner. I could come home as a kid and say, Dad, can you help me with this story problem? And he could jump in and help me. Now you bring a Common Core problem to a Gen X parent or something like that. They don't know how to help you, because they can't do it the way that it's on there, because it's made intentionally to separate the generations. So now what do you have to do? You have to go back to the teacher. You have to go back to the critical activist, in many cases to build the relationship with them for learning. And you can't go to your parents for learning. That's that Marxist component that is purposely trying to create a system to separate families, from each other. And so it's very distinct and remarkable if you're looking for it.
Wasn't Karl Marx, didn't he grow up in a Christian home and then he just totally rejected it?
Yeah, and by the end of his life, Marx, I've seen some people make the case that he was full-blown, Satanist, really, in many ways. Marxism is a pagan religion. It's not a philosophy. It's not an economic structure. It's a revolting against Christianity, and that's what all of this is. It's all against the God of the Bible. It's against our Creator. It's the modern day Tower of Babel that we are seeing right now, of trying to force everybody to speak the same language. If you don't speak the same language, you're going to get canceled. You're going to be cut off, and we're going to shut you down in some way. And you have to get an agreement, get in line. And that's going to build this kind of global, safe haven, this global tower that we as a civilization can climb into to try to, have some sort of spiritual utopia apart from God. Well, the news is it doesn't work. And there's been a lot of people who've tried to set themselves up against God, our Creator, and it never ends very well for them. And so the best thing we can do is to recognize His lordship, to submit to Him. And what we actually find is that He's a loving Father. And the tyrannical, the king that we thought He was, He's not. And He's actually, Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Augustine said this about heaven. It's one of my favorite quotes, that heaven is the place of the freest of wills, because for the first time we will have our sin nature cut off from us, dead and gone, and we won't be limited by that. And we will be free to follow all of the pure desires of our heart without any sort of drawing towards any of the negative. And it's going to be a beautiful thing. And, to me, I don't know why that's not more attractive for some people, but, when you have wickedness in your heart and bitterness in your heart, you're going to make God your enemy. And that's what we're seeing.
Well, it's a major lie that the devil has created. And a lot of people are susceptible to that lie, especially if they're vulnerable in some way, shape or form. And a lot of young people are extremely vulnerable to these thought processes.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, I saw that there was a university in Melbourne and they had like Karl Marx Day or something along those lines. It was close to there as well. And there was thousands of kids. I kid you not, thousands of them. And they were interviewing some of them, and obviously a lot of them were part of the LGBT Rainbow Alpha Mafia group, which, surprise, surprise. And you can obviously tell somebody that is considered a Marxist. They've got a look about them.
Yep.
They don't look happy. They've obviously got colored hair. They got something along those lines. And it just fascinated me. I'm like, well, do you guys even know anything about Karl Marx, who he was as a person, what he did? And they're spouting a lot of his so-called principles or his philosophies. And I'm going, none of that makes any sense. And if you're saying that you want to be a Marxist in today's society, what are you doing in Australia in a democratic society? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm sure Venezuela would love to have you, right? I mean, there's other options. And it's, we're seeing the same thing with, like, right now in the U.S., these pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine demonstrations and, uprisings that are happening. And, you have all these people there that are, LGBTQ for Palestine. And, the ignorance that is to think, and then you see people interview people over in Palestine and show them videos and say, hey, all these, LGBT people are supporting you. What do you think about that? And they're like, that's terrible. That's, it's like they literally are like, they deserve death. They deserve stoning. That's their worldview. That's their philosophy. And like, but yet they try. This is the useful idiot thing that Marx, and other, really, socialist communist thinkers have talked about so much, that it promotes this idea of just grabbing kind of whatever group you can convince that they're oppressed, so they'll become an ally, with you. And that's why we're seeing allies develop between the LGBT movement and the pagan movement and pro-Hamas groups and radical Islamic groups and different things like that. They're allying together. They don't even get along very well themselves, but they're working in the same way against a specific thing. And it's not America. It's not Donald Trump that they're against. They're against Christ, and they're against, really their creator. And so that's becoming, this is a good versus evil thing, more than ever before.
Love the Queer to Palestine movement. And they're going, Palestine's plight is our plight as well, so we must be together on this. I'm like, yeah, good luck with that.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Good luck with it. But I wanted to ask you a question we may have missed before, but why shouldn't Christians swear?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, interesting. So let me lay a foundation here. So first off, I believe in what I would call, what I think, the scriptures call the gospel of God's grace. So I do believe that everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, right? That there are, that we have a freedom and liberty in Christ, that we did not get saved by our good behavior or our good works. Therefore, we do not continue or keep our salvation based upon our good behavior or good works. Now, before we just see that as a license to sin, we have to acknowledge that our holiness or our obedience to Christ, it insulates us against certain worldviews and positioning or posturing of our heart that could lead us astray. Now, this, of course, at some point you get into the secondary doctrine of, are we once saved, always saved, or can we lose our salvation? At minimum, Scripture says that we should have, some sort of like fear and trembling and sober-mindedness when it comes to our own salvation. We should never take that for granted in that way. I do believe that we have a security as believers, but we also, the truth is in the paradox. We're also, simultaneously sober-minded and grateful for the position we have, and we never want to go against God's grace in a way that takes advantage of that. And so, is there anything wrong with a believer? There was, saying a swear word. In a lot of cultures, like my wife's a German speaker. They don't have, 5 different words for, human excrement. We have, if I can be crude on your show here, poo poo and doo doo and crap. And, we could go down the list, right? They don't have that in every language. And so, they have one word, right? And so our language here in the United States and in English, and I think this, both we're going to have in common, obviously, here in Australia and England as well, is that there are words that are viewed by culture as abrasive, as crude, as, given to a particular thing. Now, do I think that you're going to hell in gasoline underwear if you said a word that is a quote unquote curse word? No, I don't. I also don't believe that when the Bible says taking the Lord's name in vain, that is referring to somebody cussing. I don't think that that's what it's meaning. I believe what it's doing is it's invoking the name of God and either applying it to something that he is not behind, or to take the name of God, but to not actually mean anything by it. And it's just some sort of religious, calisthenic that you're going through or something like that. And so, but we do see things about, purity. We see things about, make sure our speech is gentle and seasoned with salt and, this sort of language. And so, can a believer enjoy certain freedoms? Can they have a beer? Can they have a glass of wine? Of course they can, right? But is it better to limit your freedom for the sake of giving life to other people? If I hear as a pastor, and I don't know how this would play in Australia, but here in the United States, in kind of in the Midwest, a conservative part of the country, if somebody, stopped into my church office and I'm sitting here at my desk drinking a beer, and using certain words, they would go, "Why am I following you as my pastor?" Right? It would hurt my witness. Now, I'm not worried about what people think, and that, there's people that will go, "I just can't live my life worrying about how other people think." I'm not worried about how anybody will think, in that they're controlling my behavior. I am interested in living such a life that shines bright enough that it makes it attractive to them to go, "I want what he's having," right? I want to be part of that. I want something that's there. And so, I'm also not advocating for some sort of fake Christianese sort of language that we just develop, that every time somebody says, "Hey, how are you?" "I'm blessed, brother," and you're never really honest with yourself or with them. This too is something we see through. But I think that in today's world, where we see so much darkness, we see the world going in such a strong direction, that it is wise to limit our freedoms that we have, for the sake of life, giving life to others. We could make an argument that Paul used some pretty strong language in a couple of his epistles, and I wouldn't deny that. If words like that are going to be used, it better be at the right time for the right purpose. But I don't think that we should just have frivolous speech that ruins our witness, on a regular basis.
I love what you said, and I totally agree. Like, growing up, I grew up in a very conservative Christian household, went to small Christian school, went to a very independent Baptist church all my life. And I never questioned. They just said you'd be sinning if you said the F word or the S word. So never said it.
Yep.
Always had this fear and trembling. And if we said a bad word, or what was considered a bad word, we'd have our mouth washed out with soap, believe it or not, Lucas. That was a thing. I had it twice, I think. I think I said bloody twice, and then got my mouth washed out with soap. Which, traumatic in of itself. But nowadays, like, I'm not in this fear and trembling kind of mode that if I said the F word when I'm driving, God's going to strike me dead right then.
Right.
So it's sort of like one of those things that a lot of Christians need to be able to ask questions and interpret the Bible and what Christ actually said in the right way. But yeah.
So here's the interesting thing. And, I haven't talked about this on a lot of programs yet. So, you're bringing out, I think, an interesting topic here. But, if you go back 5 years and look at some of my material, what you're going to see is a really strong focus on the gospel of grace. You're going to see a really strong focus on teaching people what I would call faith righteousness, the priesthood of believers. Really identity focus, who you are in Christ, what we have. I believe everything that I was teaching about that still, and I would still teach that to Christians. But on a lot of times when I'm doing these shows, I'm speaking to people from all different backgrounds. And there is so much deconstruction that's happened. So many people that have just used grace as a license to sin. So many people that have a progressive Christianity. Like, look, if people are already saying that Christianity and homosexuality can function together, or Christianity and anti-Semitism can function together, or whatever, then using a swear word is probably the least of their concerns, right? If they're already willing to be in a same-sex relationship. And so we have justified so many of these sort of really immoral, godless behaviors that have been brought under kind of the guise of Christianity. I actually see what's happening is there is an uprising against that. It's kind of this righteousness movement, this holiness movement that's happening. You're seeing a lot more people who are kind of straight edge culture, If you went to my house right now, there's probably a bottle of wine in the fridge. I don't drink at all. I haven't had anything to drink for, like 20 years. I mean, it's been a long time. I mean, maybe not that long, but a long time. And I don't drink. But if somebody came to my house and they brought a bottle of wine for a dinner party, I would have no problem if they wanted a glass of it to have a glass of it, right? I'm not there to, they're not getting drunk. They're not doing those things. I'm not going to micromanage their behavior in that way. I also don't want them to feel like because I'm a pastor that they have to be one way in front of me and one way. I'd rather them be their real self all the time. So we at least see what the base level is and where we're dealing with and how discipleship needs to work. But what's going to take place here, and I've been predicting this, and I kind of hope I'm wrong, but it's my fear, is that in another 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that maybe you and I are doing another podcast and we are talking about the dangers of legalistic Christianity. And because I think what we're going to see is as this pendulum swings, that it pushes back against, all of this kind of woke stuff, all of the progressive stuff, all the leftist stuff. That is actually self-refuting. It doesn't exist in Christianity very long, because anybody who's serious about the Christian text is going to dive deeper into it. And eventually they're going to go, hey, this doesn't line up with everything I'm hearing in this progressive rainbow church that I'm attending. And so it will be kind of eventually self-refuting. And so, but I think that in an effort to push back against it, we're seeing kind of an over-exaggeration of some of these other areas. And it's people who don't have a foundation in their identity in Christ, in the gospel of grace, they will fall back under legalism. And we're going to need like a modern day book of Hebrews or book of Romans to kind of snap them out of it. And that's that kind of pendulum swing that happens so often in culture. And I think it's a real thing. I don't think we're there yet, but I see it starting to move. So if I'm just acting as sort of a predictor of what's coming, that's something I definitely have my eye on.
So we haven't necessarily reached peak woke in society or peak woke within the church yet. So we've got to wait for that, which is going to be very interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on. You're going
to see, I'm working on a new book, and I got the green light that I can mention it. So it's not going to be out until February 2025, I think is what we're shooting for right now. But it's called The Pagan Threat. And I believe one of the things that we're seeing is that wokeism has evolved, and it's exposed itself for really what it's been all along, and that is its paganism. And it initially utilized the church as the vehicle for bringing this message. You go back to the social gospel, the early 1900s, or even the early kind of theological movement of the historical Jesus, quest for the historical Jesus that happened in the 1800s and early 1900s. This was all happening in the church first and foremost. There was Hegel kind of positioned himself as if he was Christian, with a lot of his ideas. This critical theory and progressivism and these things, it was born out of and kind of incubated within Christianity. But Christianity is not a good long-term host for it, because it eventually is self-refuting, because the Christian text is so specific, so definitive, and anybody that tries to merge their progressive beliefs with the Christian text will eventually come up against the text itself. And the word of God is living and active, sharper than a double-edged sword. And it's going to penetrate through that. It's going to expose it. It's going to judge those things. And I think you will see people that they're going to have one or two options. They're either going to go, hey, I've been going down the wrong path, and they're going to return to Christ. Or they're going to say, hey, I thought Christianity would line up with this progressive, pagan belief that I have, but it doesn't. So therefore, I have to push past Christianity and to go into some sort of, early form of paganism and, Hellenistic paganism or shamanism or, some other thing that allows them to still have crystals and Ouija boards and practice occultic practices in these things and be trans. And because the Christian faith is not actually something that would support that. And when they look at the text, they will see it.
It's very much cultish behavior, the pagan movement, especially within the church. I mean, I think a lot of Christians have become relatively tolerant of all this stuff going on for some reason. It's like they're going, you got to look at Jesus' example. He was kind, he was loving, and they sort of confuse love and the insanity that goes along with it. They're going, right. I've got to love this person, warts and all, even though they may be sinning in the eyes of God, I'm still going to love them and tolerate everything they're doing and everything they're saying. Meanwhile, society is going to hell.
Yep. Hey, look, I had a guy that I really consider a dear friend. I've spent a lot of time, with him in the past. We've had some really heart-to-heart conversations. And he had shared with me just probably about a year and a half ago that basically he's started to identify as kind of having this divergent, fluid type of sexuality. I don't know how he would define it, specifically today, but not a heterosexual framework and very different one day, different the next, kind of gender fluid in that with things. And so this is a guy who I love. This guy. I have enjoyed a lot of time that we've spent together. We, had been at some similar conferences and things and had coffee together and stuff like that. Talked about faith. He'd asked me all sorts of questions about my belief system. But when I started becoming more outspoken about some of the dangers of wokeism, I'm the same guy I was before. I have the same beliefs I had before. I just realized now how important it is to talk about these things publicly. And so for him, it's an end of relationship. And so he just fired some, nasty comment on my social media here that I had posted recently. And, here's what people go, how do you respond to that? Well, you can ignore it. You can argue back. I don't know if either one of those things really do what you want it to do. If I had to choose one or the other, I would choose ignoring it. But I think there's a third option. And my third option is I just left a comment and I just said, hey, miss you, my friend. No amount of disagreement will ever change, how much I value you. Hope things are well. It's really hard to come back from a statement like that. And especially when it's public, it's a public exchange. Anybody can go to the page and see this, right? That, how do you respond to that? How do you come back from that? And I don't know if he's going to have a moment where he falls to his knees and says, man, I can't believe Lucas would be that nice to me. Jesus must be the answer. I hope that happens. But if nothing else, I'm willing to whittle that away little by little, because the thing that won over Rome, the thing that ended paganism the first time was actually Christian witness. It was that they saw Christians who were willing to die for what they believed. They saw Christians who were willing to love despite it being hated. They saw Christians who were willing, to not recant their faith, even at the risk of personal peril. They saw Christians who were willing to die in the place for other people, and give their own lives. And all of those things together won over Rome to such an extent that Christianity started spreading and growing. And unfortunately today, and this is kind of circling back to the start of our conversation, is I think that today's Christians have learned a little too much from today's conservative as opposed to the other way around, because the conservative culture is really good at firing little, quibs and insults and arguing and all these sorts of things. And I want some political apologists out there that can really defend the position and take strong stances. I'm thankful for, a lot of the strong voices that we have, but we don't need everybody doing that. And what we need more than anything is we need people who can show their Christian witness as they are holding to a conservative politic. That doesn't mean being soft. It doesn't mean being weak. It doesn't mean letting people walk on you. But it means in our strength and in our power, in Christ, that we don't lose the witness of love that's flowing in us, and that people can see that even when we are strongly in opposition to maybe their worldview.
I appreciate everything you just said. That is a big thing that I've been thinking a lot about actually in my own life and how I interact, because I do a lot of videos and I receive a lot of comments on those videos, and a lot of them, they're generally kind. And I'm like, should I respond to this person? I want to respond. There's that urge to respond, because I'm like, how can you think that way? What's going through your brain?
Right.
At this present point, for you to actually say that, I'm trying to be kind and nice, and I am an empathetic person, and I want to lead with that firstly. But sometimes I get comments and I'm just going, oh, I want to say this. I want to.
Now, look, let's not also, let's balance this out a little bit.
I'm
so
not
it
perfect,
doesn't just seem, look, Jesus was willing to call the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. He was willing to call people snakes and vipers. He was willing to throw over the tables in the temple, and so there's a balance here, and it's very situational. If I have somebody who is what I would call an agitator or an activist, then I a lot of times will be a lot firmer on pushing back against their belief system and really taking that head on. That's different than somebody who I would call is just struggling with a belief system. They, as sort of an unknowingly, have just adopted the ways of the world, and they're struggling through that. They're not necessarily an activist. They're not trying to convert anybody to their way of thinking. They're just, this is the way they see it. And that person, I think, needs a lot more grace and love and gentleness through this than the person who is out there trying to, we'll use kind of the naughty word here, groom others in their worldview. And I think that person we must be a lot stronger against. Sometimes you have goats in the flock, and sometimes you have wolves in the flock, and you need to be able to distinguish the difference between them, and you treat a goat differently than how you treat a wolf. And I think that that's important for us to remember.
Have you come across or come up against he's quite well known actually for debating a lot of Christians that would consider themselves conservatives, the one that considers himself to be a homosexual pastor? I forgot his name.
Brandon Robertson?
Yeah, that's the one, Brandon Robertson. Have you come across him at any point?
Yeah, so Brandon and I have never met in person, but we have bantered back and forth quite a bit on TikTok and Instagram. We've stitched each other's videos and have had some conversation there. It's interesting. Like, I'll stitch a video, and I mean, here's the thing. Like, I don't mind coming really hard against an ideology, but that's different than how you treat a person. Mm. And so, I had one kind of funny video I did on TikTok. TikTok is actually my biggest platform. We might have talked about that, in the past, but there was, kind of this meme that was going around on TikTok, and it was this guy like grabbing another guy by the collar and flipping back and doing like a judo flip with the guy and basically just throwing him, And I took that little video, stitched it over the top of a church with a rainbow flag, and said, how to handle progressive ideology in the church. Now, what a lot of people took that as is that I was saying that this is how we should handle sinners. That's not what I'm saying. I don't believe that we should grab sinners and toss them out of the church. I believe that we should grab wrong thinking and toss it out of the church. And there's a big difference. And so I can address, Brandon Robertson when he is sharing this stuff kind of as doctrine. I can grab those ideas. I will dismantle them. I will argue against them. I will present against them. I'll show scripture against them. And they're easy to refute. And, it's very predictable kind of Marxist stuff. There's another guy who's a little bit more, mysterious. That's Dan McClellan, who does a lot of stuff on TikTok, is one of probably his larger platform. And I've stitched some of his things, had some interactions with him as well. And they're sharp guys, but they've been strongly influenced by critical ideology, progressive thought. I mean, it's dripping from them. And so, but if I were sitting down, I would sit down with Brandon and have a conversation with him anytime he wants to. I would talk to him, and I've tried to do that even on Instagram. We've gone back and forth several times, and it's, when you treat somebody like a real person, it tends to disarm them a little bit. Now sometimes it's just not like have to just deal with the ideology. But yeah, he's definitely a usual suspect in that space. My guess is, and I'm not trying to say this specifically about them because I don't know for sure, but my guess is a lot of these guys are funded by somebody. There's somebody who's paying them to make content like this for deconstructive purposes. And I think that happens a lot more than we realize it does.
There's a guy on Piers Morgan. I don't know if you've seen him, but he's a black guy, Ernest. He wrote the book, The Case for Cancel Culture. Check him out. You should do a TikTok on him.
Okay, I'll take it.
I want to see the flip of Ernest.
I will see what I can do. Yeah,
it's honestly painful to watch. So I have to bring on you for that. But I wanted to ask you this question before we sort of wrap this conversation. For someone that is ideologically captured and they've taken that ideology and they've attached it to their identity of sort, how do we navigate those waters? Because a lot of people seem to get stuck there.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is why it's so difficult, because they have this critical theorist sort of framework that we're seeing operating, whether it be queer theory, liberation theology, critical race theory, fat theory. We're going to have AI critical theory here soon, and if we haven't already, on that robot has rights and has its feelings and everything else. We're seeing this develop quite a bit. We've seen the same thing with kind of critical Islamic theory, which is really this pro-Hamas stuff that we're seeing. And so if they can get this Marxist belief system to get attached to your personal identity, that this is who you are, then it's very difficult to break through that, because to let go of the ideology feels like you have to let go of your identity. And so that's a challenging thing. I think our best hope in that is to get back to teaching people as best we can their identity in Christ. And we have to separate those things. I think that, a major case has to be made regularly right now for depravity, or if you come from a Catholic background, original sin, or, our fallen nature, however you want to say that we have to expose that none of us have it together. I mean, even the Pope here recently did a whole, he did that 60 Minutes interview. You probably saw some stuff on that. And he's basically introducing Pelagianism, which is that people are mostly good, and that there's only certain people that have sinned in some way, but most of the time we're good just in and of ourselves. And it's a false belief. I mean, you have the Pope of the Catholic Church is introducing a heresy that was actually, ironically, refuted by the Catholic Church originally. And so that should be exposed right away. And so we have to call these things out. And how do we fix this? We have to show depravity. Depravity is actually a freeing thing, because what depravity shows me is I can't earn it. I mean, you and I could have a contest. You're an athletic guy. We were talking about your running and stuff that you do. My guess is you're faster than I am. You can probably jump further than I can. And if we were to have a contest to see which one of us could jump over the Grand Canyon or jump the furthest, you would beat me, but we'd both be in a lot of trouble, because we'd both fall. I mean, we'd be doing the Wile E. Coyote, thing all the way down, to the bottom. And it wouldn't matter if I could jump further than you, or if you could jump further than me. There'd be no room for boasting, because the end result is death for both of us. And this is the spiritual condition of man. This is the place that we're in. And so we have to recognize that understanding that depravity and preaching and teaching that depravity, if we do it correctly, and then immediately, as soon as somebody gets it, as soon as somebody says, I mean, it's like, well, what must I do then to be saved? These are the questions that we see asked in the book of Romans. When you teach this right, that's when you then introduce, but thanks be to God, who's rescued us, from this body of death, right? And so, that should break those things free in people's lives. But there's a lot of work to do, because there has been a massive amount of time, energy, and dollars that have been spent on really reprogramming people away from a biblical worldview, and to see that as a false narrative, and instead introduce these kind of really distorted ways of thinking. And so the task of the church, it's perhaps never been greater than what it is before us today.
I love the analogy of trying to jump off the cliff so you can get to the bottom the fastest. If you get to the bottom the fastest, you're going to end up dead. It's like you're sort of midway with each other, and you look at the other person and you go, this is a mistake.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Like that. You have a collaboration with the Babylon Bee, Woke Jesus. Yeah. I encourage people to go and check that out. But how did that come about? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I got to think about how much maybe I can say. So first of all, the guys at the Bee are incredible. I'm a big fan of theirs. Seth Dillon, who is at the helm of that, he had endorsed my book, Woke Jesus. We've had dinner together before. He's just a really sharp guy. And they've gone through some pretty massive cancel culture, historically, with kind of the old platform of Twitter, and that got a lot of attention here in the States. And they stuck to their guns through the whole thing, which was really cool to see. So they were working on already kind of this skit for a Woke Jesus, and approached us about what we'd think about kind of attaching the book to it, kind of doing a collab there. We loved the idea. We loved the skit, instantly. And Jared and the team there just did an awesome job with it. And so, we were really excited. But I mean, I think that, I don't know how many yet. It would probably 3 million views. I mean, this thing has gotten, it's just been incredible. And so really kind of, blew up and put woke Jesus even more on the map, which has been exciting. And it's just, and I haven't talked really about the book a whole lot, but the book Woke Jesus, it's not satirical. It's not, it is a book exposing, this doctrine. It is, I really set out to write that definitive guide on understanding the dangers of progressive ideology, how it's crept into the church, what we can do about it. And so, that's kind of the book. But yeah, they were great partners in that, and it definitely a really funny piece.
They did a recent one. I don't know if you've seen it, but like the devil is in an office meeting with, like, you got the very progressive individuals. I think there's 4. Yeah. And he's basically saying, you guys have gone too far, but that's
I did see that one. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought
you're overdoing it a little bit. This isn't quite what I had in mind,
Just tone it down a little bit. Just
yes, exactly. That's what it feels like. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah. Lucas, my friend, I really enjoyed this conversation. Got to have another one with you at some point, perhaps when your new
love to.
comes out. But where can people find you, connect with you, and learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a lot of exciting stuff happening right now. So obviously, lucasmiles.org would be a great place to go to check things out. You can also check out my social media on Instagram and TikTok. I am at Mr. Lucas Miles, Mr. Lucas Miles on both of those platforms. And we actually just launched a new shirt that says "Defund Woke Church." So we're launching that. So of course, everybody needs to get a shirt like that. It'll start some great conversations at the dinner table and everything else. So that's available if you go to either the store on my site, or probably easier to find even through the social handles. It's on my link in bio there, so you can grab that. I'm going to be at Turning Point USA's. They're calling it the Believer Summit in July in Palm Beach, Florida. There's just a slew of amazing Christian thought leaders. I'm honored to be on the list and get to spend some time with Charlie and the guys down there for that. And so that's coming up July 26th to the 28th. Got some other conferences and events coming up as well, so they can keep checking back to my schedule there at lucasmiles.org and watch for a new book. It's in the works. I'm rounding the corner on kind of chapter 3 right now, and trying to crank this out and ready for the new year.
Love your work, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me on the
Appreciate it.
Box Podcast.
Thank you.